I used to believe so many lies about money. There are so many of these money myths that sound true and sound good. Things like you should never rent or credit cards are evil. We've all heard many of these and we've probably believed them and even said them ourselves. I know I have. But today I want to unpack some of these more common money myths we might be believing, where they go wrong, and how we can think about them through a biblical lens. Before we dive into those, if you are interested in real talk about money from a biblical worldview that you will hopefully find grace-filled, practical, and helpful, please consider subscribing to It's All His and join me for a new video every week. Let's grow in stewardship together. All right, myth number one is one I know that we have all heard because it's one the world repeats, and that is that money is the root of all evil. You may not have known, but this is actually a misquoting of the Bible. You can find the original verse in 1 Timothy 6:10, which is found in the New Testament. And it reads, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." It's not about the money itself. It's about what we're worshiping with the money, how we're using the neutral tool that is money. Are we using it to serve self or are we using it to serve God? Myth number two is that budgets are for broke people. This one always kind of makes me a little sad. As if the idea of having a budget is sort of a punishment that only people who don't make a certain amount of money every year have to go through and suffer. And the wealthy, those who are doing well with money, they just live willy-nilly and they just throw cash around. It's crazy. The average person who doesn't budget overspends by at least 7% every single month, which seems like kind of a small number, but when you add that up over time, that's a big chunk of money that you're not making a plan for. And the reality is that wealthy people, probably many of them, got wealthy or better off financially because they budgeted, because they were careful and they made a plan for their money. It doesn't matter how much you make, you need a budget. Everybody needs some kind of a plan. So if you believe the myth that making a budget or saying you're on a budget is somehow implying that you're not doing things right with your money, you've just got to erase that way of thinking. Because it doesn't matter if you make $30,000 a year, $300,000 a year, or $3 million a year. In order to faithfully manage that money, whatever amount it is, you need a plan for it, and that's where a budget comes in. Myth number three is that if you're going to invest your money, you need to have a financial advisor help you do it. Now, there's nothing wrong with using a financial advisor. We used to use one. In fact, almost a year ago now, and I've talked about this in other videos, we sort of fired our financial advisor, and I put that in finger quotes because it wasn't like we were unhappy with him or he did anything wrong. It was just we realized we were paying him so much money, way more than we should have been when we started looking at what the costs were for his service and what we were getting. And we learned that we could do what he was doing for us. We could do it ourselves for a literal fraction of the cost of what we were paying him every single quarter. This is the internet age. You have YouTube, you have ChatGPT, you have things that can help you learn about the basics of investing, because the reality is investing isn't that complicated for the average investor. With platforms like Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, Robinhood, others, you are able to very easily invest your money, understand what it's going into, and pay very minimal cost to do so. A financial advisor can absolutely be helpful, but if you don't have a crazy estate with a lot of complicated things that you need to manage, you totally can take care of this yourself. And speaking of investing, that takes us to myth number four. Investing is only something wealthy people do. This is so not true. Thanks to things like low-cost index funds and online brokerages, everybody can be investing. You could start with as little as $10 and you could get an account, a brokerage, or a Roth IRA. You could get something like that up and running in under an hour. We recently helped our now 17-year-old son set up his first Roth IRA now that he has a job. Now he is very easily able to start moving money into that Roth every single month and appreciating the growth of compound interest. When it comes to investing, the key is just being consistent. Do you have a 401k or something like that at your employer? Take advantage of that, especially if there's a match. I have a whole playlist about investing for beginners and DIY investing that I've been working on building, and I will link that down in the description below to hopefully help you feel a little more comfortable with the idea of investing if it's something that you think is only for the wealthier people who have a lot of money, because there's definitely a myth that is not true. All right, myth number five is I have a credit card, so I don't need an emergency fund. I remember the first time a friend told me this, and I was just like, seriously? An emergency fund is money set aside, liquid, and ready to go so that if something happens, when something happens, you've got it covered. A credit card is a loan in waiting with an extremely high interest rate. The last thing you need if an emergency has struck you is to now be in debt at a crazy high interest rate. That's just gonna make the problem worse. A true emergency fund gives you peace of mind. It gives you margin. It helps to keep you out of debt. So please, if you think a credit card is a sufficient emergency fund, allow me to try to change your mind. I promise you, a real and true emergency fund is going to be way better. And that leads us into myth number 6 on the topic of credit cards. It's that credit cards are always bad, they're evil, never touch one. I have been this kind of person too. And I'm not saying that avoiding credit cards is wrong. If you do not trust yourself with a credit card, if you want nothing to do with credit cards, that's awesome. I just think now, after many years of living debt-free and doing so many budgets and thinking through lots of different facets of how all of that works, the credit card itself isn't the problem. It's how we're using them. If we're not disciplined with our credit card, it's going to cause harm. Like I just talked about in the last myth, those interest rates, if you don't pay that thing off every month, those things are going to kill you. But if you are able to pay it off every month, we pay ours off every 2 weeks because I do a budget every 2 weeks. So I make sure that I'm always working ahead with the credit card. I budget the money that I'm going to need, the bills and expenses that I'm going to need, and I make sure the money is sitting there in the account before it's even spent. So that 2 weeks later, when I go back to do the next budget, I'm able to say, okay, what's the balance on the card? It should be this because I know what I've budgeted to spend. Make sure that it is. And that's where you check to make sure that you're not giving into any overspending. If you're sticking to your budget, that won't be a problem. And then I have the money ready to go to pay it off. So I'm never working behind. I'm always working ahead. If you can stick to your budget, if you cannot think of a credit card as just free money that you can spend when that chunk of your budget is out, like for example, if you've spent all your food money and you know you could just go out to dinner with that credit card because, oh, what's the big deal? But you're disciplined enough to know you shouldn't because you didn't budget for it, then you can absolutely use a credit card as a tool that can have a lot of benefits. You could get travel points and cash back. One of the things I really like about using my credit card as opposed to when I would use cash or the debit card is the security of it. I'm not carrying around big amounts of cash like I used to when I was doing an envelope budgeting system. My husband definitely appreciates that his wife is not walking out with a bunch of cash and someone's gonna like hit me over the head and steal my purse. I also love how much easier it is to do my budget because I'm not having to go through when I'm balancing my checkbook just to make sure everything is showing up right. I'm not having to go through every little debit card transaction. I'm able to just see, okay, everything, there might be a few things that are on that checking part, certain auto drafts and things that you can't put on a card, but I put everything I possibly can onto that card so that we get those cashback rewards. And now when I go to budget and balance my checkbook, it's a really quick process. Whereas before, just that step alone, trying to track down every little penny would take a while. So credit cards, they're not the enemy. If they're used wisely and carefully, they can actually be a tool that you use to make things easier, more secure, and even get some perks. Just make sure you are never carrying a balance. And if you don't think you can do those things, then definitely leave credit cards out of the equation, and that's okay too. Myth number 7 is that you should always buy a house, you should never rent. Renting is just throwing away money. And I do agree that in the long-term scheme of growing wealth and financial wisdom, the goal should be to own some real estate to some degree. That's a good way to have more financial security. But renting isn't always a bad choice. There are going to be seasons of life and times where buying a house could actually be more detrimental than beneficial to your finances. Home ownership comes with taxes, insurance, unexpected repairs, lots of things that you will have to pay to fix or fix for yourself. It's not something to just jump into because you think you need to own a home and it's the right move. You should definitely have a nice emergency fund before you even think about being a homeowner. Otherwise, your house is going to be a money pit. It's going to cause you to go into debt if you don't have some cushion to help pay for the things that are inevitably going to come up. Sometimes renting is just the right thing to do. It gives you some margin. It gives you flexibility. Maybe you're in a season of life where you don't want to be stuck somewhere, and owning a home does plant you a little bit more firmly. Maybe you're not in the right career or financial position to make a wise home purchase. Maybe you're not living in an area where you know what you can afford is an area you would really want to invest in and live in. There's definitely no shame, and there can even be responsible wisdom in renting for a time. A little over 10 years ago, my husband and I moved our family all the way across the country, like all the way across. And when we first arrived in our new home state, we rented. We had no clue where we would want to really settle down. And buying a house, that's a really big investment. There's a lot to think about when you're making a purchase like that. And we were hoping to buy a home that, Lord willing, we could stay in for the long haul. We first moved to an area of town that was a little bit more expensive because it had better schools for our kids. And in God's timing and sense of humor, we eventually started homeschooling, so we didn't need to be tethered to that school district. While we were living in one town, we ended up going to church in a different town. And that's where we started building our community and our friend groups. We were spending a lot more time in that town and really just living back in the other one. So as we started getting more acclimated, making friends, connecting with community, as we started homeschooling, we began to realize that we had a bigger span, a bigger area that we could look at. And we were able to buy a home eventually that we love, that feels just perfect, tailor-made for us in an area that we are just blessed to live in. And we never would have considered this area if we had just bought a house right when we moved here. Yes, for a time, did we pay someone else's mortgage for them? Did we lose out on potentially building equity? Sure. But in the long haul, when you think about the big investment, and when we see how God faithfully opened the doors and provided the home that He's given us now, we were okay with renting for a while. There's no shame in renting. Sometimes it is the wisest and best thing that you're gonna do for the long term. And speaking of home ownership, that leads us into myth number 8, which is one that I kind of don't really want to talk about, but that is that the myth is that you should always pay off your home as quickly as possible. And I love the idea of a paid off house. We have been completely debt free for over a decade, minus our mortgage. We bought this house 8 years ago, and we were able to get it at a good time in the market with a very low interest rate and a pretty great payment. And while I would love to have this house paid off, and we have thrown extra money at paying off the mortgage, mathematically speaking, I'm not 100% sure that's the right thing for us to do, because with such a low interest rate and time in the market before we're ready to retire, we're in our mid-40s, it probably makes more sense to take any extra money from our budget and throw that at investing. So this is something that we are still praying and thinking through, because on the other side, the security and freedom of having your house owned outright is pretty cool. Overall, it does not always make sense to put all of your extra money that you could be using to save and invest onto your mortgage. It really just depends on you and on your priorities. There is no right or wrong way. This just takes thoughtful wisdom, prayer, maybe seeking some wise counsel, and really thinking this through about what your long-term goal is. Maybe you would be more blessed by just the security of having that house paid off more quickly, even if it means you have less when you retire. Or maybe you are happy with that really low payment or that really low rate, and you don't want to lose any growth, and you are gonna just focus in on investing or being more generous. These are all personal stewardship decisions, and they're really just ones that only you can make. But for sure, there is not a clear truth that you must pay off your house as fast as possible. All right, the next myth, myth number 9, is another one that I'm pretty passionate about, and this is the myth that you shouldn't talk about money with others. And kind of a second myth that goes with that is that you shouldn't talk about money with your kids. So my other job, other than being a homeschool mom and homemaker and creating this channel, is teaching at a local high school Christian co-op. I teach personal finance and consumer math. And I love the fact that we can talk to kids and tell young people about how to manage their money well. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't learn that stuff in school. And I learned a lot of stuff in school that I have no use for now, but I make money decisions every single day. And it's so important that we teach young people about money. Now, I'm not saying put a lot of pressure on children, share money stresses with your kids. You have to do age-appropriate money lessons. But it is not wrong to tell your kids things like, oh, I'm making the budget, or that's not in the budget, or maybe we'll budget that in next time if we can, or no, we're not gonna get that because we're saving for this. Those are all good things to start ingraining in our kids' minds about stewardship and about being wise with their finances. And I'm also not saying that we should sit down and be tacky and talk about like exact amounts and values and how much we make with other people. I remember one time being in a room with some other moms, and one of the moms, who was pretty well off financially from what I could perceive, made a comment about how she was embarrassed that her husband only made $100,000 a year. And I remember thinking, there's other moms in this room who you probably just made feel really bad if their husbands don't even make that. Like, you're embarrassed that he has that blessing, and you said that out loud to these other moms. Like, it always kind of stuck with me, and it rubbed me wrong. So I don't disagree. Don't be tacky about money, but talk about money with your friends. I can't tell you how many times I've just thrown out like well, it's not in the budget, or, oh, I'll have to budget that in next time, or no, I can't do that because I didn't plan for it, it's not in the budget, or could we do this instead because that fits into my budget? Those start good conversations. I've had friends come to me and say, hey, can I talk to you about how budgets work? Or I want to work on making a budget. Could I pick your brain and, bounce some ideas off of you? This is a good thing. We want to be spurring one another on and encouraging one another. So having wisdom, what you share, what you don't share, maybe you talk about it with certain friends and not with other friends, be discerning, but don't just assume that you should never talk about money with your kids, with other people in your life. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to share how you're handling money. It's okay to share struggles. Just be wise, but definitely don't think that you can't ever bring up money, because it's just not true. And particularly parents, our kids, they don't magically learn stewardship the second they turn 18. If they're not learning it from you, if they're not seeing it modeled, and if they're not having it taught in the schools, although I would definitely say it's more your responsibility to teach them this just by your everyday practice than it even is if it is in the schools. And I will say, currently only 26 of the 50 states here, I live in the US, are required to teach personal finance as a graduation requirement in high school, which I would argue even high school might be a little late to start learning about these concepts if you're not learning about it already. But only 26 states. And then even when they are required as a graduation requirement to learn it, often it's just maybe a semester. They're not even required to get much training. So financial literacy for young people, this is a huge impact culturally, economically, to families. It breaks generational cycles of poor money spending. It helps people to build wealth and have financial freedom. It's vital, and it is important that we're making sure the young people in our lives know how to properly handle money. And if you're a Christian, we are taught to train our children and teach them diligently. And there's a lot in the Bible about how to handle money. All right, myth number 10. College is the only way to be financially successful. I don't know what generation you are in, but for my generation, this was something that I grew up just knowing. It was in the air that we breathed. If you wanted to be successful, if you wanted to do well in life, if you wanted to do better than your other family members who were less educated, you had to go to college. And often that meant you had to get into debt and get loans because maybe those family members weren't doing as well. And they were telling you, oh, you're going to do better than us if you go to college, but we don't have any money to help you go, so take out some loans. College is great. I went to college. I have a bachelor's degree. My husband didn't finish college. He took some classes here and there, but that wasn't for him. It wasn't how his brain worked. So he got in with a company and started building up some skills and has been able to grow and move into other companies and take this skill set and build on it. And not that this is the only thing that matters, but the reality is that him not having a degree, but him having the work experience and the skill set that he has versus me having the degree that I have, he can very easily make triple to quadruple a year what I could make if I took my degree right now and went out and got a job. Not every successful financial story starts with a college degree. College is great for some, but that's not necessarily the route for everyone. And to teach people that it's the only way to find success is just to fail people, really. In 2024, the average student loan debt here in the States was about $37,000. But workers in the trades like plumbers or electricians can very easily work up to making $60,000 to $80,000 a year right out of high school pretty quickly without needing a degree. College can be a great path, but it's not the only good path. Trade school, starting a business, getting different certifications, doing what my husband did, just getting a job at one company and working your way up and building your skill set. There are many ways to build a livelihood that honors the Lord. So don't believe that myth. Let's stop pushing only one version of true success. Let's stop looking down on people if they're less educated than us, because I know that is happening. I've seen that happening even in Christian circles. And let's start encouraging people to follow the path that God has them on for the way that God made them, and encouraging them in faithfulness and biblical stewardship. So have you believed any of these myths? I know I have, and I've said some of them and I've practiced some of them. The goal isn't perfection and getting everything right. The goal with stewardship is progress and faithfulness, consistency, and continuing to learn. If you want more encouragement to grow in biblical stewardship, click over into this playlist next, and I will see you over there. Thanks for watching.